All right, so if you've been coming to Shadow Rock for a while, you know that I like to tell stories. And there's a reason for that, and that is because I don't want to ever get to a place where theology gets theoretical, right? Where it's just reserved for the guys in an ivory tower that just sit and talk about theological things, right? I want to keep it practical, and so whenever something interesting happens in my life, I'm always asking the question, okay, what can I learn from that? Or what does that experience teach me about the character of God? The reason is because I'm on a journey too, you guys, and I like sharing that journey with you. So here's a story. When I was in third grade, we were living in Argentina, and my mom said, hey, Dave, there's an art show at the U.S. ambassador's house, and do you want to come? I said, sure. So we're going around looking at all the paintings in his mansion, and for mood music, there was this guy playing piano on a grand piano in one of the rooms, and my mom, being a pianist, she went over and started talking to him, and after a few minutes, he said to me, do you want to be on my show? And I said, sure, what's it called? And he said, the Carlitos Balá Show. And my third grade mind immediately started thinking, he sees it. He sees my talent. He sees that I am made for the screen. He sees that I'm made for show business. It wasn't until a few years later that I realized, it probably has more to do with the fact that my mom was a cute gringa and he was trying to impress her. But nevertheless, the Carlitos Balá Show was insanely popular back in 1981. Yeah, this was him. It was a kids' show in Argentina. It was kind of like Captain Kangaroo, for those of you who remember, even before that, the Howdy Doody show, right? And in a day and age where there were only 3 channels on television, everyone had seen this show in Argentina. Everyone knew this show. They'd all seen it. And one thing Carlitos Balá did on his show is he had this big wheel, and he would spin this big cage thing that had like 1,000 different names on it. And he would spin the wheel, and then he would reach into the cage and pull out a name, and he would read it. And that kid was so excited. Somewhere in Argentina, a kid would be like, yes, I'm going to be on the show. And so that kid would come on the next week and win prizes and be interviewed and all that. And so I told him, I was like, I'd love to be on the show. And he's like, great, watch the show this coming Sunday night. Carlitos will read your name, and then you'll come to the studio on Monday, we'll record it, and you'll win a bike, and then the following Sunday, you'll see yourself on television. So it sounded like fun, because the guest kid who was on this show always got a bike, and there was nothing I wanted more at the time than a new bicycle. I did not have a bicycle. I really wanted a bicycle. This is my chance, right? Now, my family wouldn't normally sit around on a Sunday night and watch the Carlitos Balá Show. Like that, this is just not what we would do. However, there was a pianist that made a promise to my mom and me, and depending on how good his word was, that would determine, we planned our lives accordingly. We're like, we are going to watch the Carlitos Balá Show because he made us a promise. So Sunday night rolls around, and my family and I were glued to the TV. And Carlitos, he comes out and he sings his songs and he does his funny skits. And then it was time for the wheel. And he spins the wheel and he reaches into the cage and he pulls out a piece of paper that says, David Nicholson. And my whole family, we're all hugging and cheering like, woo, that's so cool. And so far, so good, you guys. So far, this guy's word was good. The pianist's word was good. And so my mom and I went to the studio the next day, and I was ready for my big break in show business. And Carlito Balá, he did his skits and his songs, and at one point, he's singing a song while playing the keyboard, and my mom goes, we're behind him. She goes, that's interesting. I was like, what's that? She said, he doesn't know how to play the piano. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? Are you telling me that TV celebrities are frauds? Is this really true? Can that be? And sure enough, he was playing to piped-in music. I hate to break it to you guys, I don't know if you're aware that sometimes celebrities can be fake. I know, that's mind-boggling to the imagination. But at least there was one. At least there's one celebrity in this world who was fake, and that was Carlitos Balá. He's playing the piano while not really playing the piano. So anyways, Then it's time for him to call me up on stage. He calls my name and asks the usual questions. What's your name? What school do you go to? What's your favorite soccer team? I knew how to say all these in my broken Spanish. I was ready. And I'm in third grade, so my Spanish wasn't that great. And he goes, and then he asks me a question. He goes, and what does your dad do for a living? Oh, no. I knew how to say missionary in English. I'd never said the word in Spanish. So I was like, like this deer in the headlights look on my face. I go, he puts the microphone in my face. I said, es un mis. He goes, what? Like everyone's leaning in. Es un misionario? And he's like, a what? I said, es un pastor. He's a pastor. And he's like, oh, okay. Crank up the music. All right, thank you. Everyone applaud for Dave. And here's a gift. Don't forget to get your bike. Here's your gift. And I leave off the stage and the show continues. And while they never gave me a bike, I know, right? Disappointment of all disappointments. I get home and I open this box and it was a red dictionary. You guys, I was there for the bike. He gives me a red dictionary, and there was also some candy stuffed in this box with it. It's not that I wasn't grateful for my dictionary. It's just that when I was out with my friends and they're riding on their bikes, and I'm riding on my dictionary, I couldn't keep up that well. It's hard. It was really hard. But it was all right, because Sunday night was going to roll around, and I was going to be on national television. So Sunday night rolls around, and my family's watching the Carlitos Balá show again. We're with some friends. We're all together. We're going to make a party out of this. And at the point, no joke, at the point where he says, come on out, David Nicholson, there's a power outage in the whole neighborhood. I know, and I never saw myself on national television. Talk about disappointing. I was so sad, but it's okay, because I got a red dictionary. So I tell you that to tell you this. When there's no character to back up a promise, the promise is really just a wish, okay? The pianist had enough character to get me on the show. He actually even had enough character to rig that whole whole name thing, where my name was on every little piece of paper in that whole thing. But he didn't have enough character to get me the bicycle. Carlitos Balá on national television said, Dave, you're going to get a bike. Never gave me the bike. Let me down. When there's no character to back up a promise, the promise is just a wish. So today we're going to be reading an ancient text, and it's Daniel chapter 8. And in it, God makes some promises about things that are going to happen, and unlike the celebrities, unlike the politicians that will make a promise that they can't keep, God's promises can be anchors for our souls. All right, so let's read. Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. During the third year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, saw another vision. So this is during the Babylonian Empire. Daniel has this dream that a couple of other empires are going to pop up. And we know specifically which ones they are because it tells us later in the chapter. So the first one is the ram, which represents Medo-Persia. As I looked up, I saw a ram with two long horns standing beside a river. One of the horns was longer than the other, even though it had grown later than the other one. The ram butted everything out of his way to the west, to the north, to the south, and no one could stand against him or help his victims. He did as he pleased and became very great. So there's the ram with one horn being longer than the other. And this represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And we know this from verse 20. We're going to find out here in a little bit. But even though the Medes started out stronger than the Persians, which started later, Medes started first, but the Persians became longer. And so that's why the horn, one of the horns grows stronger than the other. You've heard of the Battle of Thermopylae before. They've made movies about this. This is where 300 Greek soldiers tried to hold their ground against this Persian army that was just as far as the eye could see. This is who they're fighting against. They're fighting against a ram that no one could stand against, as it says in verse 4. Then comes the goat, which represents the Greek Empire. While I was watching, suddenly a male goat appeared from the west, crossing the land so swiftly that it didn't even touch the ground. This goat, which had one very large horn between its eyes, headed toward the two-horned ram that I had seen standing beside the river, rushing at him in a rage. The goat charged furiously at the ram and struck him, breaking off both his horns. Now the ram was helpless, and the goat knocked him down and trampled on him. No one could rescue the ram from the goat's power. The goat became very powerful, and at the height of his power, though, his large horn was broken off, and the large horn's place grew. In the large horn's place grew 4 prominent horns, pointing in the 4 directions of the earth. So the ram was strong until it wasn't. And the goat comes along and destroys the ram, and this is referring to the Greeks destroying the Persians. And we know this from verse 21, okay, that the goat with the large horn represents the Greek Empire. And in the Bible, usually horns represent power, okay? So the big horn is Alexander the Great, but then Alexander the Great dies at a young age, and in his place come 4 horns. His son was not old enough to take the throne, and so his kingdom is divided into 4 smaller parts. Then we get to the little horn, okay? From one of the prominent horns came a small horn whose power grew very great. It extended toward the southeast and toward the glorious land of Israel. And this is exactly what happens. When Alexander the Great dies, his son's not old enough to receive the throne, and so his kingdom is divided into 4ths, and these guys are all fighting against each other for more and more power. And which is the power that is the greatest? The Seleucids. Out of the Seleucids comes this guy named Antiochus, which is referred to here as the little horn. Out of the Seleucids comes Antiochus, and he hated the Jews. Okay? Verse 10, its power reached to the heavens, where it attacked the heavenly army, throwing some of the heavenly beings and some of the stars to the ground and trampling them. Okay, so this is kind of a spiritual thing that's going on. It even challenged the commander of heaven's armies, challenged God by canceling the daily sacrifices offered to him and by destroying the temple. The army of heaven was restrained from responding to this rebellion, so the daily sacrifice was halted and truth was overthrown. And the horn succeeded in everything it did. So there's utter chaos for a few years. Antiochus hates the Jews. A few things that he did, it was called the abomination of desolation. He goes into the temple and he just wants to offend the Jews as much as possible. He erects this statue of Zeus, puts it in the temple, which is so scandalous. Then he takes a pig and sacrifices it on the altar. I don't know if you know this, but Jews hate pigs, right? Pigs are unclean animals, and so just to spite them, he took a pig, sacrificed it on the altar, stole a bunch of the holy relics from the temple, and then he took all the Bibles that were around and destroyed them. He burned them. So it's pretty clear from these verses that we just read that it's not just an earthly war, but there's this spiritual war happening at the same time, okay? Then verse 13, then I heard 2 holy ones talking to each other. One of them asked, how long will the events of this vision last? How long will the rebellion that causes desecration stop the daily sacrifices? How long will the temple and heaven's army be trampled on? And the other replied, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the temple will be made right again. So what's this 2,300 days? When Antiochus begins his reign, he began in September 6, 171 BC. He forced the Jews to engage in idol worship. They hated that. There was a guy named Matthias. He said, I'm not doing it. So they killed him. He had 5 sons. His 5 sons said, we are going to avenge our father's death. And so then they start doing guerrilla warfare. They start getting some of their friends together. They start doing guerrilla warfare against the Seleucids, and that's called the Maccabean Revolt. Okay? On December 25th, 165 BC, this is a few years later, the Jews, led by Matthias' oldest son, his name was Judah, he drove Antiochus and his armies out of the land, and they go into the temple, and they cleaned it from all of its defilements, and then they relit the candles. Now, they only had enough oil for the candles to be lit for one day. And you've seen this before, it's the menorah, and they lit the candles. They only had enough oil to make it last for one day, because it would take 8 days to make another set of oil that was, purified the right way, and it would take 8 days to do that. And so they lit the candles. They're like, we're doing it anyway. So they lit the candles, And then they started to pray, and the story goes that they prayed, and the Lord answered their prayer, and the candles that were supposed to only last for a day, they burned miraculously for 8 days until the new oil was ready. And the commemoration of this event is called the Feast of Lights, or what we now call Hanukkah, okay? So that's what Hanukkah means when someone says, Happy Hanukkah, that's what that is, okay? So where do the 2,300 days come in? From September 6, 171 BC to December 25th, 165 BC, from the point where Antiochus begins his reign to the point where the temple is restored, 123 days exactly. So here's the interpretation. Let's get into that. Verse 17 says, As Gabriel approached the place where I was standing, he said, You must understand that the events you have seen in your vision relate to the time of the end. The two-horned ram represents the king of Media and Persia. The shaggy male goat represents the king of Greece. And the large horn between his eyes represents the first king of the Greek Empire. And that's referring to Alexander the Great. The four prominent horns that replace the one large horn shows that the Greek Empire will break into four kingdoms, but none as great as the first. Okay? So all those, Seleucids and all the others, they don't compare to the Greek Empire. At the end of their rule, when their sin is at its height, a fierce king, a master of intrigue, will rise to power. And that's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. He will cause a shocking amount of destruction and succeed in everything he does. He will destroy powerful leaders and devastate the holy people. He will be a master of deception and will become arrogant. He will destroy many without warning. He will even take on the Prince of Princes. In other words, God. He's going to take him on in battle, but he will be broken, but not by human power. This vision about the 2,300 evenings and mornings is true, but none of these things will happen for a long time, so keep the vision a secret. And then Daniel's overcome by this vision. For several days he's sick, but then he performs his duties to the king, and he's troubled by this vision that he saw, okay? So I got to ask a question for you. Why do we do this every week? Why do we come to Shadow Rock and do this every week? Where we read a book that was written thousands of years ago. It's an interesting thing, right? Like, nowhere else in culture does this happen. Why not come together and watch a TED Talk? Why not come together and listen to an entertaining podcaster like Joe Rogan? Why not get up here and read Chicken Soup for the Soul or some inspiring book like that, right? Because as we've seen in our lifetimes, values change. Society's values change, and the definition of truth has changed in our lifetime. The definition of love has changed in our culture, but God hasn't changed, and his love letter to us hasn't changed, okay? Sometimes the world gets really chaotic, and our lives get really chaotic, and when that happens, the best thing we can do is just come back to God and say, God, I've made such a mess of my life. Do you still love me? And then through his word, he tells us over and over again, yes, I love you just as you are. I love you unconditionally. There's nothing you can do that can make me love you more. There's nothing you can do that can make me love you less. I love you unconditionally. But I also love you so much that I'm not willing to let you stay the same. So I'm going to put my spirit in you and transform you from the inside out. So I've been meditating on Daniel 8 all week, and there are all kinds of applications that we can get from this text. Like, we could read it 100 times and get something new every time through, right? But these are the three things that I got out of it this week. Like I said, I'm on a journey with you guys. I just want to share my journey with you. The first thing that I got out of this is that the person you admire shapes who you become. And the reason that stood out to me is because Alexander the Great is like the quintessential, like the prototype of the kind of guy that I like to put up on a pedestal. Alexander the Great's father was a guy named Philip. If you've heard of the Philippians in the New Testament, they're from a city called Philippi. That was named after Alexander the Great's dad, who was this incredible general who just conquered all kinds of areas and lands and people and stuff like that. He was a brilliant general. And Alexander the Great was jealous of his father, and he's like, Dad, you're going to conquer all the lands and not leave anything for me. I'm going to have nothing to do, right? He's jealous of his dad. And his dad saw his son. He's like, my son has so much potential. I'm going to hire one of the best And so he hired this tutor for his son. His tutor's name was Aristotle. Not sure if you've heard of him before, but he's a brilliant mind, right? And then Philip gave Alexander this black horse. And it was a horse that was wild and majestic, and no one could tame it, no one could ride it, but Alexander did. Just impressed everybody. And when his dad saw him riding on this majestic horse, he said, quote, he said, "My son, Macedonia is not worthy of you. Conquer a kingdom that is great." So here are the Persians with their 2 million man army, right? Alexander the Great comes with an army of 35,000 guys, and they destroy the Persians. And then they keep going, and they just conquer lands and people everywhere. And you read that, or you watch a movie about that, and you're like, man, I could have sworn I just grew another chest hair. Like, that was so cool. That was just such a shot of testosterone as I'm watching. That is just so cool, right? And at one point, Alexander the Great was depressed because there were no worlds left to conquer. Like, this guy is such a dude. He's such a man's man, right? He's good looking, he's athletic, he's smart, he's a brilliant leader. And just when I'm about to put him up on a pedestal, just when I'm about to say, I want to be just like you, that's when the sacred pages remind me that there's a better hero than that hero. Alexander the Great was a man who claimed to be God. He made himself to be God, but Jesus is God who humbled himself to become a man. Alexander the Great was in competition with his father. Jesus was in full submission to his father. Alexander the Great shed the blood of millions for his own glory. Jesus shed his own blood for our salvation. And at the end of his life, when he was only 33 years old, Alexander the Great throws this party for all of his soldiers, and he gets drunk, and he's out in the rain, and then he gets to his house, and he's soaking wet, and he just falls asleep. Falls asleep in his wet clothes. 3 days later, he died of pneumonia at the age of 33. And if that's the guy that I admire, then that's going to affect my lens. That's going to affect the glasses that I see the world through, right? I'm going to see the world through a lens where I say, how can I defeat these people for my own ego kingdom, right? But if Jesus is my hero, then what am I going to do? I'm going to see the world through glasses that say, how can I serve these people and lift them up and make them better? The people that we admire shape who we become. That's the first thing that I got out of this text this week. What's another application from this passage? The second thing is, victory is decided in the heavenlies before it's seen on earth. When you read the second half of this chapter, you see that there's all kind of interplay between what's happening on earth and what's happening in the spiritual realm, okay? There's an earthly battle going on, but there's also a spiritual battle going on. And you see that there's this war between angels and demons and God and Satan, right? And that was a really good reminder for me this week. Because I don't know about you, I like watching the news, right? And when I watch the news, sometimes I get into this mode where I think that the solution to the world's problems is more legislation or more activism, right? Or more education, or I just need to blast more people on social media who don't agree with me, right? You can get into that mindset. But then the sacred pages remind me that the weapons of our warfare are not earthly. 2 Corinthians 10 says, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. If I really want the world to change, if I really, really want the world to change for the better, then it's time to start praying. There was a night in Argentina when my dad was driving through the night, coming back from a church plant, a church startup that he had done. And he was out in the middle of nowhere, and he just had this strong urge to pray. And so he prayed. He didn't know what he was praying for. He thought he was praying for finances, but come to find out in a few minutes, he was praying for something else. He learned why the Lord impressed in his heart to pray so deeply. And as he's driving down the highway, this car comes up next to him and shines a spotlight in his eyes, and he says, this is either the cops or I'm in trouble. And so he pulls over and the car angles in front of him. The first guy that got out of the car was wearing jeans, and my dad says, "It's not the cops." He backed up as fast as he could. You can only go backwards so fast. The guy gets in the car, and the other car chases him down, both of them going backwards. While this is happening, God woke up two people, other parts of the world. One was my Aunt Becky, and the other was Jan Hedman. She had this dream that my dad was in a car, and there was this river that was trying to sweep my dad out of the car. She woke her husband up, Uncle Vic, and she said, he was a missionary friend of ours, and she said, "I had this dream," and she explained it to her husband, and he said, Satan's trying to kill Dick. And they started praying, and they prayed, and my parents have said, if you're ever in a world of hurt, there's nobody you want praying for you more than Vic and Jan. Like, those guys just pray. They touched heaven when they prayed. So they started praying, and when English fell short, they started praying in tongues, which is just a biblical thing. It's a language that God gives you when you run out of English words to say. Like, the Lord gives you this heavenly language, and what's cool about that is you know that you're praying the perfect will of God, and so they're just praying so fervently for my dad. While they're praying, my dad maneuvered around the car and started driving forward. There's a guy who was out of the car, and he's doing a motion like this. And my dad's thinking he's throwing nails to try to pop my tires, or he's going to throw a grenade. And then the front right tire blew, and 2 bullet holes in the side of the car let my dad know that that's what it was. He was doing this. He was shooting at my dad. Tire blew, so my dad pulled over. 4 guys get out of the car and start beating him mercilessly. And they left him in a ditch, and they robbed the car. Ironically, the only thing my dad had to steal was 4 Bibles, and there were 4 guys in the car. They each took them. My dad said, if I ever see a guy preaching with one of those Bibles, I'm going to have a lot of serious questions to ask him. My dad's going to be here in a few weeks. You'll have to ask him what he remembers from that night. My dad was driving through this stretch of land where these thugs had pulled over several people and didn't let a single one of them live. Tonight was an exception. And I have no doubt that the reason why my dad's alive today is because people were praying. Now, how much does God do without our prayers, and how much does he depend on our prayers? I don't know. Theologians have been trying to figure that out for years. I don't know. All I know is this, and that is that victory is decided in the heavenlies before it's seen on earth. And I'm just so glad that there were people that were praying that night. If I want to see true change in the world, I've got to start praying. One last thing I get from this text is this: when God makes a promise, history bends to fulfill it. God makes a lot of promises in this text. He's like, hey, the Medo-Persians, they're going to destroy the Babylonians, and the Greeks, they're going to destroy the Persians, and the temple is going to be in shambles for 2,300 days, but it's going to be restored in the end. Don't worry. And when God makes a promise, history bends to fulfill it. Unlike a TV celebrity that promises you a bike and doesn't give it to you, or a love who promises you the world, but whose character reduces that promise to a wish. God's word is good. Why? Because his character is good. So when he promises us something, that can be like an anchor for our souls, you guys. And I want to end by reading you 10 promises that God gives us in the sacred pages. There are thousands of promises in the Bible, but I'm just going to give you 10. And just ask the Lord, say, Lord, which one of those is for me today? All right? 10 promises. If you acknowledge Jesus as Lord and truly believe God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If we admit our sins to God, he will forgive us and purify us completely. The Holy Spirit will empower you to live boldly for God. Trust God completely. Seek his direction in everything. He'll guide you down the right path. Don't stress. Pray about everything. God's peace will calm your heart and mind. God will provide everything you need out of his abundant resources. Through God's love, you can overcome any challenge or difficulty. Number 8, nothing in all creation can separate you from God's love through Jesus. Number 9, Jesus is preparing a place for you and will come back to bring you to be with him. And number 10, God will end all suffering and he will create a world without pain, death, or sorrow. God's promises are going to come true in your life because God's character is good. And if his character weren't good, what would it be? It would just be a wish, right? But as his kids, he makes us these promises. And if he made you a promise, he's going to bend history to make it come true. That gives us hope in the chaos, right? Let's pray. But before we do, I want to read this first promise to you again. If you acknowledge Jesus as Lord and truly believe God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And so I want to ask, does anyone want to get saved today? All you have to do is acknowledge that Jesus is your Lord and you will be saved. And I can even baptize you this morning, like right now, if you want. I don't know about you, but when I try to be Lord of my own life, I just make a mess of it. But when I say, Jesus, you're in charge, my life aligns. Anyone want to make Jesus Lord of their life today? Can you just slip up your hands so I can know who I'm praying for today? Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else? Hands going up all over the place. Thank you. Anyone else? Wonderful. Father, I thank you for the hearts that you've touched today. I thank you for the hearts that are open to you today. Father, I pray that you will fill every heart today with your spirit, with the spirit of Jesus, and start to transform us from the inside out. Lord, we love you. Help us to live for you. Help our lives to be a reflection of you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.